recording and the presentation will be available to you in the next few days or week. So watch for that. Before we start and hand it off to Sarah, I would like to mention that our next Ask the Expert session is titled What Consultants Never Say. You Don't Need to Do Social Media by Josh Gordon. And that'll be on September 24th at 12 p.m. And I'm anxious for that for myself because everything I read it's just the opposite. So I'm curious of his opinion. Mark your calendars now. Again, it's September 24th at 12 p.m. If you have any suggestions or recommendations on other topics or programs that you would like to see or us to offer, let me know. Put that information in the contact or in the chat room or reach out to me directly. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. All right, so I'm excited to be with you today. And this topic really started with the question, where do you start when everything is challenging? I think with COVID, it kind of just increased the challenges that we face as small business owners and as leaders inside of our organizations and even as leaders inside of our homes. And the place where I think the start is Jim Rohn. Now, and by the way, if you don't already have a piece of paper and a pen, I'd encourage you to grab it. There's a couple of questions, and I would invite you to take and jot yourself some notes so that after this, you can think about it more as we get into some of these topics. So I love this quote by Jim Rohn. He is actually, or he was, an entrepreneur and a business owner and did a lot of talks on leadership. And he said, hey, if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you're going to fall into someone else's. And guess what they have planned for you? Not much. We spend a lot of time thinking that other people are thinking about us and judging us and paying attention, and they're not. They're busy, like us, worried about their own stuff. So when we think about leading in challenging times, I think it really boils down to paying attention to us and what we are doing. So today we're going to just kind of talk about, hey, how do we really lead ourselves? Personal vision, having our mindset and actions, talk about our reactions and our perspectives, our time and priorities, our appearance, and our relationships. And I think when you look at those core things, it will make a difference in how you lead and how you present yourself. So the first thing I think we need to talk about is the stuff below the surface, right? If you think about the behaviors and things that we see, most of it's that top of that iceberg, right? But underneath of there's a lot of unconscious things that we might not be aware of and that nobody else knows about us, right? So it could be unconsciously our relationship to how, our relationship to our religion, or our relationship to how we view work, how we view workers, all of that kind of stuff. And I'd just encourage you to kind of be curious about the stuff that's underneath, right? The stuff that we use and we filter our lives through. Because those filters and that stuff below the surface affects how we show up and how we lead. So, how do you really learn to lead yourself? When I think about leading, I think about, our conversations that we have and how we learn. We learn a lot of times by watching others. So making sure that we have really good leaders in our lives that we can mirror off of. We learn by taking classes. But the reality is that leadership is something that you just have to practice. And I think that it really starts with the big picture. And for me, when I think about big picture, what I think about is 10 years from now, or 5 years, if 10 years seems to be too long away. And this is something that you'll want to maybe jot yourself some notes for the answer to this. 10 years from now, if you're living your perfect life, both personally and professionally, what would that look like? And I think that taking the time to really understand what that big picture and that big dream is makes a difference on how you show up when you're challenged and how you show up when things are a little bit harder. Because that big picture gives you the oomph to keep going. And there was a research study that I love to share. I didn't do it, but I read about it and I thought, wow, this is so insightful. Researchers brought people into a big room and it was a huge open space. And they told the participants one at a time, they said, hey, I want you to walk across the room to one of the corners. And the participant said, well, which corner do you want me to walk across to? The researcher said, oh, I don't care, just walk to a corner. And as the participant starts to walk across the room, the researcher puts a chair in front of them. And that person comes to a dead stop and doesn't proceed any further. So then they do the experiment again with new participants. And this time when they come in, the researcher says, hey, I want you to walk across the room to the right corner of this room. And so the participant starts to walk across, they put a chair in front of him, and the participant walks around the chair and continues to the right side of the room, to that corner. And I think that's the same thing for us. When we have that big picture, it doesn't mean that the big picture doesn't change and that our things that we value and that we're striving towards doesn't change. But when we have that, we know that if something gets in our way, that we have to walk around it and keep going in the direction, or we go under it or over it. I tease that I like to see, oh, can I eat it? Because I love desserts and stuff. So if we can turn it into something that's edible, I'm all about that. But the reality is we've got to remember that we have that bigger picture, because the bigger picture helps us continue on when things get put in our way. The next is our mindset and our actions. The thing that's amazing about being human is that we create habits, and habits help us move forward quickly, and we don't have to think about things all the time. So here's a perfect example. Have you ever driven home from work, and when you got there, you're like, how in the heck did I get here? Did I even stop at that red light? And we just have this unconscious habit that took over and got us from our workplace to our home without us having to think about it. So that's a good thing. However, those same habits can be really bad things. So we can be in a habit of saying good morning to people, right? We walk past them in the office, we say good morning, how are you? And the person says, oh, I'm not doing very well today, my pet died. And we say, oh, that's great, as we're walking past, because we're in a habit of greeting people and saying, how are you? But we're not in the habit of greeting people and really being mindful of the answer. So we have to pay attention to the habits that we've created and make sure that those habits are still good habits for us. And the other habit that I have fallen victim of before, and I'm sure that you will relate to this, is hanging up the phone with a coworker and you say, love you. And then you're like, oh, that was my coworker. So we just get in those habits. So we just need to just raise our awareness and our mindfulness to those habits so that we are not just on autopilot all the time. Raising your self-awareness as leaders and as small business owners, we need to train ourselves to be aware of what's going on. We need to catch ourselves and actually choose to make an action instead of reacting. And that comes from the self-awareness. And the easiest way that I can tell you to build self-awareness is start a reflection practice, right? And reflection practices don't have to be super complicated. It's just a matter of really thinking about what you've learned from experiences that you've had. And there is research out there that says, hey, if you really want to learn from experiences, taking the time to reflect on it makes a difference in what you've learned and what you'll do with that information. One of the easiest self-reflection practices that I can recommend is called reflection on action. And this is really simple. When you have something that happens, reflect on it. Ask yourself the question, what happened? And then describe it. I personally, when I have this happen, I like to journal it because I want to write it out so I can read it, so I get a better understanding of it. But just simply doing it mentally can also help you. So I wouldn't want to discourage you if you're like, oh, I hate to write, then don't write, but take the time to think about it. What actually happened? Then look at the next question. So what? So what does this mean? So does it really matter? Any kind of so questions that you can come up with. And then the last piece is now what? Now that I understand what happened, and I'm curious about, well, what does that really mean? Now, what do I do with that information? Maybe this now what is next time I interact with somebody, instead of saying it X, Y, and Z, I'm going to say it a different way because that maybe will help the situation be better. Prioritize and time management. I actually did a Facebook Live about this morning. And the thing that I think is so important, and I was telling Steve about this right before we started, is if you would have asked me last year how my business was going, I would have told you it's really great, but I wish I was busier. But later in the year, I started to have this understanding that I don't want to be busier. I want to be productive and I want to make a difference and I want to be influential. So and of course, as all of us, as small business owners, I want to make money, right? So those are different than being busy. A lot of times we get confused and think that being busy is a good thing, and it is not. Being busy is probably one of the worst things that can happen to us, because when you're busy, you're not taking the time to think futuristic. You're living right here and you're just busy being busy. And it doesn't mean that you're actually accomplishing anything. So what my recommendation is really think about your 10-year or 5-year life plan for yourself personally and professionally. Understand what are the priorities that need to go into that. And there's an awesome story. You guys may have seen the video of this that illustrates this point, but there's a college professor who comes into class with this big, huge bucket of sand. And he brings it in and he brings in 5 big stones and he tells his students, hey, I want you to, without removing any of the sand, fit these 5 big rocks in this bucket. And no matter how hard the students push on those rocks, they can't get them to fit smoothly across. So the professor gives them a break. He gives them an empty bucket. They put the big rocks in, then they pour the sand over top and shake it, and almost all the sand fits in. And then the professor pours 2 glasses of wine on the top. He says you always have time for wine and friends. But what his point was is that in our life, if we want to accomplish things, we have to figure out what are our big rocks. What are the really important pieces of our life that we want to make sure happen? So for me personally, my big rocks are I want to spend time with my husband and son. My son is 19, so I'm not going to get a bunch more years to do that. I want to spend time with them. I want to spend time working on my business, which is the leadership development, coaching, and consulting. My other big rocks is a creative practice. So if my screen wasn't blank back there, you guys could see I have some artwork hanging on the wall that I'm currently working on. And I want to make a difference and an impact in people's lives. And one of the things that I know for sure is that by working with the SBDC, that I'm doing that by helping entrepreneurs get their start in their business, right? By coaching and advising them. So that makes a difference in people's lives. Those are my big rocks. And anytime that I'm just being busy, I'm not necessarily working on those big rocks. So I scheduled them into my weekly schedule. And I also have my 10-year plan that I know that those pieces fit into getting me closer to that. So I'd encourage you as you go through this process and think about these things. When you have your 10-year plan, break it down into your priorities and make sure that you are doing personal stuff and professional stuff. I taught a class a couple weeks ago, and I was coming out of the room and one of the participants said, hey, this is really hard. And I was like, what's really hard? She said, all my life, I've only worried about my professional life, like what I was going to do professionally. And now I'm getting closer to retirement and I don't know what to do with myself, right? It's because she lost track of what meant something to her personally, not just professionally. So I think it's extra challenging when you're an entrepreneur because our personal lives and our professional lives kind of intertwine really tightly. But make sure that you have stuff that's professional and personal. So your family time and things like that is just as important. All right, the next one. What does personal appearance have to do with leading yourself well? we always say, hey, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And I think in this thing of we're still not maybe as bad as we were in COVID, where we have to like isolate, it's not quite as bad as it was. However, it is easy for us as entrepreneurs and as people who maybe are working from home to only put on our pajamas, or to maybe not take as good of care of ourselves as we should be. And the reality is our appearance and the way we feel about ourselves is reflected, right? We do this internal and external reflection. So your appearance is a reflection of how you feel inside. How you feel inside can be a reflection that you show outside as well. And so it's a circular thing. If you want to feel better about yourself, look amazing. It's a good start. If that's challenging, do some internal work and then look amazing as well. One of the things that I often talk about for some leadership coaching that I do is especially for people who are not feeling super confident about themselves. And I had to do work on this myself when I was trying to become more professional. And I don't know if you guys know her or not, but Rhoda Troyer is an image consultant. She owns Rig & Company. It's out, I think, Millersburg area. I'm not sure. I'm horrible at directions. It's out Sugar Creek Way. You go out 39. But she said, hey, when I was going to her, would you want to dress and keep waiting until you get to the weight level you want to be at? Or would you rather feel really good about the way you look in the body you have right now? And it's so important for us as leaders to just feel really good about ourselves and about our appearance. And sometimes that takes a little bit of an effort, but it's definitely worth it. So I would encourage you, if you don't have that feeling about yourself and you think, hey, maybe I could use some help with that. Rhoda, awesome. I love her. I use her. I hate shopping and she'll do shopping for me. So it works out really well. All right, enough about that. Personal appearance, don't show up in your pajamas. Dress up, look amazing and feel amazing. All right, coaches, mentors, communities, and relationships. I think this is so important. If we learn from being in community with each other, then we need to make sure that our communities are healthy communities and communities that are lifting us up. Coaches, this is the way I usually describe it. Coaches are people that you usually use for short periods of time to coach you through things that you want to achieve. Mentors, I believe, are people who walk beside you in life, either in life or in business, and they've been maybe a little bit further ahead of you in that. So a mentor for me is somebody who has been further ahead of me in business, and I can look at them and I can ask, hey, how did you do that? And they're able to guide me on that. Community is really important, especially if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, I believe. Find people who are like-minded. Find people who have the same kind of goals and mindset as you. It can make a difference. And then have relationships, right? Relationships nourish us. They help us grow and they help us become ourselves. So here's what I'd like you to do really quickly. On a piece of paper, write down who are the 5 people you spend the most time with. Just give you a couple seconds there. If you only get a couple written down, that's fine. But who are the 5 people you spend the most time with? Now, beside their name, write just a brief, like two words that describes that person. All right. So whatever you wrote down, are you okay becoming more like that? Do you remember when you were a kid, and you actually may have said this to your kids, don't hang out with that person. They're not a good influence, right? We tell kids that all the time. Well, the same thing is true of us. We become like the 5 people we spend the most time with. So if we don't want to become like them, then we've got to figure out, okay, what do I need to change? How do I need to stop spending so much time with that person? Or if I still have to spend time with them, how do I put up a barrier that keeps them from influencing me as much? It is really the truth. When your parents said it, when you've said it to your kids, the same thing applies to us adults. You will become like the people you're hanging out with. So if you want to become a more successful entrepreneur, hang out with more successful entrepreneurs. If you want to become a better parent, hang out with people who are really good parents, and it will make a huge difference. And that brings us to the stories we tell ourselves. This might be one of the most important things that we can do as an entrepreneur and as a small business owner and as a leader, is the things that we say to ourselves. So just on your piece of paper, real quick, I want you to fill in the blanks for these. Ready? I am, and whatever word popped into your head, I want you to jot it down. I am just a, fill in the blank, and then I am too, fill in the blank. And now just kind of circle the one that made you feel like, yeah, I'm super excited about this, or, oh no, not so great. And I want you to answer these two questions, and you can just do it in your head. How is this helping me, and how is this holding me back? I think one of the most important lessons that we can learn is that even if we label ourselves amazing and it's totally awesome, it can still be holding us back. I can give you an example. I did this workshop, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, hey, when we were filling in the blank, I wrote, I am successful. And I was super excited and super proud of that because I've worked really hard to be where I'm at. And I was like, oh, that is so awesome. She said, yeah, but when you looked at how's it holding me back, it's not letting me spend time with my family because I take work home and I can't separate it. And so when you can recognize that about your stories, then you can start to say, okay, I need to find some boundaries here because I need something to be different. The other one was I taught this in a class, and the girl said, she raised her hand. She said, she's a physical therapist, like really high level physical therapist. And she said, when I tell people I'm a physical therapist, I say I'm just the physical therapist. And I think that just is a way of diminishing who we are. And the reality is the world needs physical therapists. The world needs entrepreneurs. The world needs leaders. The world needs you, right? So as you're telling people what you do, stop putting the just in front of it. And instead just say, hey, I'm a leadership coach, or hey, I'm a professional, whatever it is, just own it and really embrace what you are. So it really is about learning to control your story. Our words, and I'll tell you guys this in a couple minutes again, our words have power. And so we need to make sure that the stories we're telling ourselves are positive and getting ourselves to the next level. And we need to make sure that we are paying attention to our internal dialogue as well as the external dialogue that we're talking about. So learning to control your story is really important. And here's some ways to learn to control it. One is develop your new story. Sometimes I hate teaching these classes because I have to tell you guys truths and about myself, and that's always like, ugh. So one of the things that I struggled with for a really long time, even though I was on a pretty professional level, was that I wasn't good enough. And I think when I was young in my career, having that story was okay because what it allowed me to do was work harder and really become a professional, right? But when you become an expert and you become really good at what you're doing, that internal dialogue of not being good enough wasn't serving me. It was actually undermining my credibility. And so I had to change that story. And it was really interesting because I didn't even realize that that was a story that was playing in my head. I had decided to get my coaching certification because I wanted to work with leaders. And when I did that, I had to go to a coaching class. And as I was coaching and practicing, I had to go and talk to my coach. And the first time I went and talked to her, she gave me a book to read. And I said, oh my goodness, this will really help my clients. That's amazing. And I told her about it. The second time I go and I talk to her and she's like, how are things going? What's going on? And I said, well, things are going really good. And I told her some things that I was working on with my clients. And she gave me a second book and I read it and I thought, oh, this is amazing. It's so great. I can't wait to share it with my clients. So I went back, and the third time she gave me a book, I was halfway through the book and I realized those books weren't for my clients. They were for me, because my coach was able to see and hear that story about not being good enough. And instead of her just saying, hey, Sarah, you're saying you're not good enough, she gave me books and let me figure it out on my own. And when I realized that I was doing that to myself, I was basically self-sabotaging all the hard work that I did and not being as successful as I could have been if I would get rid of that story. So I developed a mantra. I think everybody has different ways of doing it, but I literally had sticky notes all over our house, in my car, and I swear my husband thought I was nuts. But every time I saw the sticky note, I said, it was like 4 sentences. I'm a professional. I know what I'm talking about. I've paid my dues. I am good enough. And so I, like, for months, it wasn't a fast process. For months, I read those to myself. And then what I finally could do is I could catch myself when I was saying I wasn't good enough. I could catch myself doing it. And so I would stop myself and I would say, you know what? At one time that might have been true, but that's no longer the truth. My new truth is, and I would state my mantra again. And then eventually, I didn't even have to do that because I changed the story and I believed myself. And now I rarely have to correct myself on it. And it's made a huge difference in how I present myself. So practice telling your new story, right? Create your new story, practice saying it, find people who will support your new story. And this can be challenging because as you are changing and as you're becoming more professional, or as you're becoming a better entrepreneur or small business owner, you're going to have stories that you need to change. And you're going to have people who want to support you in that change. Then focus on your big picture story. That big picture story for me was being a successful entrepreneur who owned a business and who loved what she was doing and how she was spending her time. And so because I had that focus, it helped me do that hard work of correcting things about my self-talk that I wasn't really helping myself with. And then the last thing I think is pay attention to what you absorb. So right now, if you watch the news, it's like really bad. So you need to pay attention that you're balancing that with positive reinforcement, positive music, words, whatever it is, because that becomes a part of our internal dialogue as well. So make sure that you're doing that. And it carries over into your business. So the economy is fill in the blank. My team is fill in the blank. The business is fill in the blank. Whatever those blanks are stories you're telling yourself about the business and about your economy. And I can tell you this from one of probably the most impactful lessons. I learned a lot, but one of the most impactful lessons I learned when I was working for Adventure Harley Davidson, the dealerships, was that what we say affects the outcomes we get, right? So if we say the economy is bad, then we're not looking for innovative ways to start business, to engage customers, that kind of stuff. And there are companies and organizations who are kicking butt right now and doing amazing things. And it's all because they have chosen and made a story that says we are going to be successful no matter what is going on outside of this organization, because we have something that's really important that we're offering the world. And I think when we think about those kind of stories and make sure that and it's not just you have to be, as the leader, you have to be the one who is talking about that and sharing that belief. And you have to get your people to buy into that belief as well. We have something important to offer and our business will not be affected. We might be doing business differently, but we can still be successful in this environment. So my soapbox thing again, your words have power. You speak words out into the world and you're creating your own destiny. So if you're going to say anything, this is what I tell myself all the time. If I'm going to say anything, I'm going to say all the positive stuff, because that's the kind of stuff I want to have around me and I want to be thinking about. Yes, I know that crappy stuff happens. Yeah, it does. But I'm going to focus on the really good stuff. So we're going to move into just how do you find next leaders in your organization? Well, the same stuff with your words have power. This is the same thing, right? If you say, I can't find any leaders in my organization, guess what? You're not going to be able to find any leaders in your organization. So you have to make sure that when you're talking about your organization, you're talking about the leaders, you say, I have potential leaders in my organization, and you're going to be able to find them, because then that's what you're looking for. I can give you a perfect real life example of this. Have you ever bought a new car, and before you bought the car, you couldn't see one ever on the highways? And then literally the day you buy it, you drive off the lot and you pass 15 of them? It's because you see what you're looking for. So make sure that you are speaking that you have potential leaders in your organization and they're going to be stepping up. So what do you look for when you're looking for those potential leaders? And I love this quote by Warren Buffett. So basically, in one, I believe, I can't even remember the book, and I apologize for that. I should have wrote the name down. But basically, Warren Buffett says, hey, if you're looking for a potential leader, you want intelligence, energy, and integrity. Those are the three things that you want to have. And this quote says, if you don't have the first, so if you don't have intelligence, energy and integrity will kill you. But if you hire somebody without integrity, you really want them to be very dumb and very lazy. And I think that really speaks a lot of truth for what to look for in potential leaders. Also, look for the problem seer and the fixer. You can find hundreds of people who can tell you what all the problems are, but do you have a person who can tell you, hey, this is a problem and this is how I think we should fix it? It'll make a huge difference. Look for people who care about people without getting in the mix. So they can broach subjects related to people issues without getting emotionally involved in it and taking it personally. And they care about the business and the results, right? Because without the results inside of our business, if we're not being profitable, we're out of business, which doesn't support the people who rely on us. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do over the next couple of days, the sooner the better, because whenever you take any kind of class like this, if you don't do something with it almost immediately, you'll forget what we talked about because you'll be busy being busy again. But take this some time to just brainstorm ways that you can develop leaders in your organization. Every organization is a little bit different in how they develop their people, but it can make a huge difference for you. But just be prepared that there is an investment. You might think, oh, well, they're in my organization, I'm going to just work with them and I won't have to make any investment. Right. So you're not going to make a monetary investment, but you're going to make a time investment. You're going to have to invest in yourself. I admire John Maxwell. I read a lot of his books. And in one of his books, he talks about the law of the lid, right? He said, your leadership is the lid for the people who are following you. So if your leadership is here, your people aren't going to go very much higher than you are. So you need to invest in yourself. Plan it, budget it, have a champion, have somebody who's passionate about developing people. Make sure, think about classes, the time. Provide mentors. Encourage your people to mentor each other. Maybe coaches. Have project opportunities. Conferences, continuing education assistance, all can make a difference. The biggest thing you can do, though, is nurture and celebrate. The things that you pay attention to, the things that you nurture, the things that you celebrate will be the kind of things that people start, oh, they're celebrating people who take ownership and people who are being more leaders. I should do that more so I can get more positive reinforcement. So pay attention to it and celebrate and nurture the things that you really want to see more of. All right, so here's the question for all of you. And you can actually put this in the chat, which will make mess Steve up for questions, I'm sure, but I would love to read your answers. What should you do with what we talked about today? And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Okay, Sarah, before we do that, I have a couple comments. One, very, very powerful presentation today. I'm so grateful that you not only presented it to those today, but that we have a recording of it. And I have a special request, and I hope you come back, because this is the kind of information our small business owners and leaders need. So thank you for that. A comment came from one of the attendees when you were talking about dress for success. And you got a thumbs up from one of our attendees that quoted, "Look good, feel good, do good." And I think that was dead on what you were talking about. And one last story I'll share before we jump into the questions is when you were talking about your personal change of focusing more on being productive rather than busy, reminds me of my banking days when businesses or companies that we worked with focused more on sales or the top line, so that they instead of profitability. And so they could certainly use your personal example as a way to improve their situation. So I think it was very, very positive comment. So to the questions, if I can. The first one is, do you have any additional suggestions for self-care?
Yeah. So there is a Richard Boyotts from Case Western Reserve. They just wrote a book, and basically he says, hey, I don't put stuff into a book until it's been researched 5 times. So walks in nature refresh us. It's things that renew us, right? And I think the reason I get so passionate about self-care is you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? There's a reason that when you go to get on an airplane and they go through the flight check instructions, they say, hey, if the mask falls down and there's no oxygen in here, put your own mask on first and then help everybody else. The reason you put your own mask on is so that you can help other people. And so often we get, again, busy helping everybody else that we forget to take care of myself and yourself. And when you're not taking care of yourself, you can't give to other people. So taking the time, take walks in nature. If you don't like walks, that's fine. Do something in nature. Prayer to a loving God is a way to refresh and just nurture yourself. Having good relationships, loving relationships, hugging people, it really is good for you. Petting, like having a pet. Now, this would not be a good fit for me, but having a pet, either a cat or a dog that you spend time with, is a way to really do some self-care. Just taking time for yourself can make a huge difference, and doing it on purpose, right? Don't wait until you're so burnt out to start taking care of yourself. If you take care of yourself well, when you're doing really well, it can make a huge difference.
Very good. Thank you. We talked about a lot of things today. What do you think is most important?
So I think working on ourselves as leaders is probably the most important. And I know that there's a lot of leadership experts out there who say, okay, once you become a leader, your responsibility is to grow other people. But at least for me, is the better you take care of yourself, the better you can lead other people. And if you're an effective leader, people will want to follow you. And then when they're following you, I always think to myself, I want to be a leader of leaders, right? Leaders get things done, and they're challenging to work with because they're out there doing stuff, but they're also inventive and creative. And so if you think about a question I posted on social media the other day is, what would happen and what would change if you think about the people who follow you as potential leaders? If you think about them as potential leaders, what changes? It changes how you treat them. It changes how you talk to them. It changes a lot of stuff. So if you work on yourself and you work on bringing up the people who are coming behind you, I think it can make a huge difference.
Okay. And then the final question that I had was, you talked about making the investment. Can you explain more about using project opportunities?
Yeah. So one of the best things I think you can do is if you're trying to develop leaders inside your organization, you're like, hey, I don't have a huge budget. I don't have that in my wheelhouse right now to spend. Have projects. And this I think goes back to that, have that 5-year and 10-year plan. It also has to do with, what do you want to accomplish this year? So if this year was amazing, what would you accomplish by the end of the year? And then having chunks of that as projects that your team members can do. And it gives you an opportunity, one, to see how they handle being in charge of a project. Are they able to complete on deadline? Are they able to communicate where they're at in the process? Right? Those are all kind of skill sets that we need leaders to have. And I always encourage, like, if you're trying to develop someone, don't just say, oh, here's a project, do it, right? Have the conversations about what your expectations are. So you have to know what your expectations are. So that way you can guide them, not on exactly like paint that wall purple, right? You don't have to tell them all the steps that required to paint the wall purple unless they've never painted a wall before. So you have to understand the person that you're trying to grow. What are their capabilities? And that might take you some time, but it's worth the investment in understanding their potential and their challenges that they might face, so that you can talk about it. Like if a challenge that you might face that I know of is your time management, we could have a conversation about that ahead of time where I could express my concerns and you can assure me of how you're going to handle that. And then we can work through it. But as you work with that person, you're going to understand, can they handle being a leader, or do they need more work and more guidance?
Excellent, excellent. I'll go ahead and share a comment or two from the chat room. Sue uses making the bed in the morning because as she completes one chore, it sets a tone for the whole day. And then Mike piped in and said, read William McRaven, Make Your Bed. It's a highly recommended read. So that's what we got from the chat room, Sarah.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. So I would just love if you guys are in the chat, what are you going to do with what should you do with what you learned today? I'm just curious.
Well, we'll give them another minute, and while they're thinking and typing, I'll thank you again for the presentation and your time today. It was to me very, very valuable. So thank you. I am serious about getting you back on the calendar. I think this is really worthwhile information. I'd like to thank the attendees for taking time out of their busy schedule today. And a reminder for our next Ask the Expert session, What Consultants Never Say, You Don't Need to Do Social Media by Josh Gordon. That's on September 24th, 2 weeks from now at 12 p.m. And again, a reminder, let us know if that either Sarah or any of our other resources can provide direct assistance for you in the future. I'll say goodbye, have a great rest of the day, but if you are still typing, please continue, we'll stay available.